Hey, so we're just doing some testing right now, just making sure that everything's working. We're gonna get rolling as soon as we can confirm that everything is up and running as it should be.
There have been unforeseen consequences to this latest update to OBS.
Rise and shine, Mr. Jonathan.
I love that you can just pick up on any little reference that I've thrown out there.
Okay, yeah, we're live
Yeah,
and
we're
we've got
live.
audio.
I'm
Beautiful.
glad it picked up that reference, at least for the live broadcast. Hey guys, how are you guys doing? This has been a long time in the making. I apologize for having taken so long to get to this point. We're about 10 minutes overdue to start. There have been so many little technical issues that have arisen from the latest OBS update that I had no idea were going to happen to us, which of course happens right before we start, but better late than never, I suppose. Today I'm joined by Jacob, who is one of our support staff at Quixel,
Hi.
and Linus, who just did a great G-Man,
Hi, hello, great greetings.
who's also one of our support staff and an artist at the company as well. Today I'm going to be going over the breakdown of this particular project. For those of you guys who haven't seen it, there's a lot more to it than just this. I've hidden all of the foliage currently and the planar reflection actors just because, well, I wouldn't be getting the same frame rate I'm getting right now. Let's just put it that way. So pretty much I want to go over all of the different aspects of having created this entire project. There's free materials going into it. All the terrain materials that you see here will be free to everybody. Some of it's directly from Megascans, some of it's blended with Studio as well. If you've never had the chance to use Megascans Studio, I highly recommend it. It is a very, very easy way to create high-quality textures in a fraction of the time that would be done with any other tool, honestly. There's just no faster way to blend things together.
Oh yeah, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Would you mind turning on the screen sharing on Hangouts?
Sure.
Yeah.
I will do that for you. There you go.
So that we internally can keep up.
Beautiful.
No
Thank you
worries.
very much.
So, yeah, this has been a humongous project. I took this thing on years ago when I got out of college, and I was like, hey, I want to make a train. I really, really like trains, and consequently, so does my son. So it was kind of a cool thing to make, just to make him happy and to have something fun to putz around in. And over time, it evolved into a kind of a thing to show off the power of Quixel Suite 2, wherein I took this particular locomotive and did the entire thing in the tool. So this is all done inside of Suite 2. Every little bit of it. It is 3 different texture sets, an 8K for the exterior, whoops, a 4K for the wheel assembly down here, and a 2K for the little windows and whatnot. The same thing goes for the tank cars too. This is all done in Suite 2. Almost no normal baking done whatsoever except for rounded corners. So this is all pretty much entirely Suite 2 and just some Photoshop work for the graffiti and CG textures for some of the leaking decals and some hand-painted stuff to go in there too. Let me grab one of these cameras. It'll actually help this look significantly more interesting. There we go. This is, yeah, so like I said, about a year's worth of work to put this whole thing together. This is meant to be kind of a showcase of what Unreal's capable of in real time. I'm by no means an expert in this particular engine. A lot of this I've picked up, in my spare time trying to learn the best ways to work with it. I've learned from other people. I've learned from just putzing around inside of it, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. It is incredibly powerful, and we live in an age where you can make almost anything look as real as you want or as stylized as you want, and it's really the only limit these days is your imagination. Which it's a great time to be alive and doing this kind of work, because anything that you can imagine can become something that you can see in the side of this engine, or really any other engine. But I choose Unreal mostly because I learned how to work with Unreal 3 in college, and UDK, which is what we moved to from that, and then Unreal 4 came out, and I had to jump on that. It's been an awesome experience so far, and I hope you guys will take, if anything you take out of this stream, I hope that you take that if I can do this, so can you. Don't ever look at me like I'm some kind of guru or expert in this. I am learning every day just like you guys are. I just happen to work for a large, well-known texturing company. That's really the only difference between me and anyone else here. So, if I can do this, like I said, you guys can. So, it's fun, it's educational, and it's amazing to do. So, like I said about hiding the foliage and whatnot, this is the updates that the guys are seeing inside of the Hangout stream are about as good as you're going to get seeing in the live stream with the foliage turned on. So I may be turning it on and off as I show off different things in this particular project. Feel free to ask any questions that you'd like to know about how I put this together. I'd love to go over everything. Some things I'll forget about, some things I'll remember, so if I kind of go off on a tangent, please don't hesitate to bring me back to reality. I have a tendency to talk a lot, if that's not obvious already. I will have Jacob's going to be reading the chat and relaying questions, and I'll bounce ideas off of Linus occasionally. He is way more technically minded in this engine than I am. I am mostly just, you know, a pure visual kind of guy. I don't understand all of the math and whatnot that goes behind everything you see. I just know that it looks good. So sometimes I break the rules, but you know, if the rules weren't meant to be broken, then they wouldn't have been put there to begin with, is how I kind of see it. So let me switch to, even an unlit this thing chews through my video card. So let's break this thing down. So this entire terrain, as you can see it here, is very basic. There's not a whole lot outside of the visible area that you see here. This was meant to evoke a specific area inside of Florida, which is where I'm from. And this project originally started as based off of a concept from ArtStation that I ran across, where it was kind of a train track running through the woods and a lot of foliage and a lot of trees and all sorts of different plant life and rocks and dirt. And I thought it'd be a great showcase piece for the Megascans library, which was just getting ready to release when I started working on this. And essentially it evolved into this because it quickly became apparent that I needed to have a lot more trees than I was going to have the time or even interest to do. I find trees to be very tedious, so I ended up asking Owen Abrun, who is one of our artists at Quixel, to make the trees for me, and these plants as well. Not all of the plants. He made the pine trees and the palmetto bushes, like this one in front of me here. I need to just delete this planar reflection in the back. It's going to speed this up a bit. There we go. Anyway, so most of these plants are things that I've put together from the Megascans library itself. The only real plant here that isn't using Megascans in some form or another is going to be these palmettos, which are basically just a kind of a color value applied to a kind of a gradient map instead of a material. The rest of it is all literally scanned. It's and most of it's very basic. If you put this in detail lighting or wireframe or anything else that shows you what these things are really made out of, you'll see it's just a bunch of cross-hatched planes. So it's really nothing more than a bunch of planes that have been like kind of sprayed out with the foliage painter. So when you break it down to what these textures or these these meshes really are, it's not really as impressive. But if you can sell the illusion, then that's really all that matters. And these materials make so much of a difference. The ability to have scanned, accurate materials is just so important. You don't have to play with values. You don't have to play with settings. You can just get in there and make it look good because it already is good as source material to work with. That's one of the biggest advantages of working with Megascans, is that you can spend more time building and less time fussing with values.
Jonathan, may I quickly interrupt you? There's a question from Milivlina. Is there a trim texture method used in the scene, for instance, the railing?
So for the rails themselves, it actually is not a trim texture. This is literally a texture sheet inside of Suite 2. I would bring it up if we had the time to do that, but I will actually show you the material itself in the browser. Let's see. This is easier to search for it at this point. Nope, there it is. Never mind. So this uses, well, it looks slightly complicated, but it's really not. So there's a lot of, I should have cleaned these up before I showed off any of this stuff. But basically it's just, as you can see here, a basic texture sheet. All of the plates that connect the rails to the wood are their own plate, and there's essentially 2 tiling textures for each section of these rails going across, and that's really all it is. It's all done inside of Suite 2, which meant that I textured this with Endu and Dedu, So most of this, it's pretty basic. I mean, it's just a rail with some rust and whatnot, and there's no materials that I used in this particular project that didn't exist inside of the Suite 2 library. So anything, like I said, anything I did here you can do yourself. If you just play with values, you can put anything together with the tool. But essentially, what you have here is the albedo map running through a little bit of a desaturation that I like to be able to control, so I've got it parameterized so that when I make an instance of this particular material, I can change how it looks on the fly. So the albedo is controlled by a saturation, which is then thrown into a constant, which is multiplied, so I can bring the values of the albedo up or down depending on what I want that particular material to look like. And this is then clamped, so it never goes above 1, but never goes below 0. Same with the reflection texture. The roughness is pretty much just straight in. As you can see, it doesn't have anything else connected to it. The metallic is also straight into it, and the AO is controlled by a constant, which goes into a power, which is then lerped between 0 and 1 as kind of its own clamp, which is then multiplied onto the albedo itself to kind of fake some shadowing. Even though this engine is incredible, sometimes you still have to do some stuff to make things pop better. If I pull out the instance here, you might be able to see why I did it. So I'm going to pull this off to the side so you can actually see this. Let's move this over. So all the parameterized functions in here serve a specific purpose, and one of the things that I like to do is a throwback to Unreal 3, which is multiplying the RGB of the normal map against a constant 3 vector, which then allows me to control the strength of the red, green, and blue channels. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that it's going to make some people's heads explode, which is something I said in the 80 level article that I wrote about this. This is something that I do for my projects. If your project is in a AAA environment, or if it's an indie game and you need standardization, you need to make sure that you do this to all of your work. Otherwise, you'll see inconsistencies in it, which will make some people go nuts. Me personally, I'm just doing this for myself and showing off what our tools are capable of, so I like to play with it and push things a little bit more and not have to constantly import textures back in. I like to be able to see what I'm changing in real time. Like, for example, if I change the red and green channels to a value of 2, you don't see much of a difference, but it is a little bit more, shall we say, like bumpier, right? If I change this blue channel down to 0.1, it becomes god-awful ugly. So 0.8 is a pretty good starting point, and 1.2 on both of these keeps it from going too crazy. And same with the AO strength. I can change that at any point. I can bring it up, I can bring it down, I can leave it back where it was, and it still looks pretty good. So it allows me to really get fine-tuned control over everything that you see here. If I don't like the way something looks in a specific type of lighting, I can change it at any point, and I'm not locked into it. Which, for me, has always been my... I don't know how you guys work, but the way I work, if I can't change things quickly, I lose interest in it, and I just kind of give up. And then I'm like, well, that's the limitations of it. I guess there's nothing I can do. Because importing a texture 50 times to get that one tweak just right really bothers me, and I don't like doing that. And that's one of the strengths of Unreal, is being able to parameterize almost any material that you have to change anything on the fly. Pretty much everything in here is parameterized. The foliage is parameterized. The terrain is parameterized. I can go here at any point and say, I don't like how bumpy this ground is. I want this to be less bumpy. So I come in here, I grab my parameterized terrain material, and I come down. And I can even switch textures at any point, too. If I don't like these textures, I can just drag and drop a new one in here. So I come down to, let's see, the gray dirt is albedo number 4, which means that would be called L4. And I just go down to the L4 normal strength, and I can change this to make it less bumpy. And there you go. And I can make it even bumpier if I want, which looks horrible, but there we go. So what it does is allows me to have total control over the Megascan material. You could use this with anything else. If you're doing procedural stuff, if you're doing textures that you've cobbled together from CG textures, or stuff that you've stylized and made yourself inside of Photoshop or any other tool, you can easily control all of this stuff, and it's really nothing more than a multiply connected to the RGB value of that particular material, which is also in this terrain master material, which we should be giving out. I need to make a link for that in a second, but it's one of the few things that I forgot to do when I was setting the stream up, because we were running around with our heads on fire trying to figure out how to get the audio to work. So you can see the normal map controller that I'm using here for that particular dirt. It's just the normal map being controlled by a set of UVs, which is for the terrain itself, which I can also adjust the UVs at any point too, which is amazing, because the thing I mentioned before about hating adjustments also comes in with hating UV adjustments and waiting for the materials to update, the shader to rebuild. Unreal takes a huge amount of time to rebuild a terrain material as large as this. I'm talking, it can be up to 5 to 10 minutes sometimes, and it's like just to change one small value, it can take an hour to get right if you have to wait and change that thing constantly. So sometimes you just have to press a button and hope that you'll get what you want, or you can just do what I did and make all of this parameterized, so you can just change it based on an instance. But either way, this comes into a multiply, and it's just a constant 4 vector, which you can just press V, and then you make a new one, and you just connect it right to it and give it a name. And I name mine based on I look at it like layers in Photoshop, so normal 4 with layer 4, so I just keep the numbers associated with one another so I know which one goes to what, instead of having to name it like dirt or grass. I just know instinctively which one is which. So this pretty much makes my life so much easier. And it's not just that, too. It's like I said with the UV changes, if I come in here and change the UVs at any point, it's super simple. I don't have to wait for it to update. I can just do it on the fly. We may have to What's that?
No, sorry, continue. We just have a question right
Sure.
out of the stream. Ikazar wants to know if it's still considered optimized if the material has that lot of parameters.
That's a good question. My understanding of parameters, and don't quote me on this, but you probably will anyway, because my voice is going to be encoded forever into this YouTube link that's going to go up. But my understanding of it is that parameters are actually pretty cheap, considering they're just mathematical numbers. So you're just changing what already exists within the shader network. You're not really adding more textures to it or more draw calls. Again, this is my understanding of it. I could be completely wrong, and if I am,
no, you're completely right. Parameters are pretty cheap themselves. It's more the actual shader that you're controlling that takes up a lot of that memory. If you have a lot of parameters, that usually means that you also have a lot of different shader stuff that you're controlling, and that can get expensive very quickly.
If you want to see what he's talking about, as soon as Unreal is done auto-saving, which I should have told it to turn off, as soon as it's done auto-saving here, I'll show you the shader complexity of this particular scene, and you'll see why it chugs so much.
Yeah.
Let's see, it should be under, I believe it's optimization, there it is. Shader complexity. Woohoo! Look at how terrible that is. So it's mostly because of the foliage. This is, it's horrible.
Art in itself.
Yeah, it does actually make kind of a nice surrealist painting, doesn't it? Like,
Overdrawn foliage is going to happen.
Yeah.
That's just how it is.
Yeah.
But as you can see, the ground material itself, at least what I think is the ground material, it's pretty expensive in itself.
hold on, don't say that until we actually look at it. Look at that, not terribly expensive.
It's pretty expensive.
No, it's not. Look at that. It's
Yeah,
mostly green.
yeah.
It's kind of dark green in some spots, but it's mostly green. We're good.
The optimizer in me, it's not too bad. It's not, but the optimizer in me is freaking out when I see that dark green.
Well, it's a good thing I'm doing this for personal work then, isn't it?
Yeah, that's also one of those huge things that you really need to take into consideration when you're doing these things. If you're just making portfolio work, go crazy. No one's gonna know. Just do it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Does it look good? Yeah, awesome.
Like, because you guys would have never known that this runs like horrible if I hadn't told you.
Yeah.
I mean, you might even like think that some of the lagging that you're seeing is because of the stream or something. So I could have probably camouflaged it like that, but no, it's just running horribly because I didn't optimize this whatsoever, and I had no intention to. I wanted to show how good the engine could look, and I think I did a pretty decent job of it. I'm sure there's people out there that do way better than this, and I can't wait to see it because I'd love to learn from that. That's again, as I mentioned earlier, if I can do this, I think you guys can too. I'm really not that great of an artist. I don't think I'm even close to like the top half. There's people I've seen that can completely destroy anything that I've made, and that's fine because it's not my goal to be the best. It's just my goal to learn and hopefully, share some of the knowledge I've learned with anybody else who's willing to listen, so that when it comes down to, hey, how do I do this? I can at least help someone else so they don't have to suffer the same way I did, which is when I was learning Unreal 3, I had no idea what I was doing, and there was nowhere near as many tutorials and people helping as there are now. Unreal 4 really changed the game with that, especially when they went free. It's just so much easier to find what you want to do now. And things like this are so much more common, where you can find somebody streaming about what they've done. And if you like what they've done, and you can learn from them, so much the better. So, another thing I did with the scene too, which I think kind of adds to the authenticity of it, is there's so many cameras in the scene, like just a crazy amount of cameras. And I'm a big photography buff, and I'm kind of a brand loyalist too. So whenever a brand treats me well, I usually tend to stick with that brand. So right now what I shoot with is an Olympus, and I use the Olympus EM1 Mark II, which is a great camera. It's micro four thirds system, which means that all of the shots that you take with it are going to be cropped in a 4/3 frame. So instead of it being like a, what's the best way to describe it, like a widescreen shot, it's going to be more like, well, as you can even see it on my screen here, it's cropped currently because we're looking through a camera. So if I switch to this camera that I have over here, you can kind of also see that it's just a cropped view. And a lot of these cameras I didn't even use in the final shots. Like this one, if anybody's from the southeast, you'll recognize this bottle instantly. It's our local grocery supermarket chain. So I just thought I'd throw it in there for anybody who ever actually got to see it. They might find it amusing. But this is one of the shots that I just, for some reason, I guess I thought it wasn't all that great, so I got rid of it. But you know, that's the beauty of working in real time, is that I can at any point come in here and say, I really don't like this. I'm going to just make a different camera and work with that. And a lot of these camera shots too, if we go back to that particular shot that we had a second ago, with the photography aspect being what I wanted to emulate here most, you can see the new tone mapper in 4.15 really pushed the boundaries on this so much. I waited for 4.15 to hit just because I wanted that tone mapper. I know you could use it in the older versions, but it seems like they did so much more with it in this newer version of it. Where is it at in here? It's been a while since there it is. So on this one, I didn't actually even set up the tone mapper. This is a camera from the older 4.14 version. So I'll set this up kind of how I did the other ones. And there we go. And you can actually use this tone mapper to get some really, really nice depth to your scenes. You can get a lot of to me, it feels like it's clipping the image, especially with the, like, not just because it says black clip, obviously, but the way the slope and the toe kind of push the values down on a curve makes these images look more like photographs and less like CG stills, which for real time is, to me, is incredible. I mean, this almost looks like, what's the best way to describe it? It looks almost like a slightly overexposed and desaturated photograph. Like this right here, I could probably shoot this, scale it up to, I don't know, 300 DPI, and then shrink it down to a 4:6 and print that out, and it probably wouldn't look too much different from an actual picture. I mean, if you have a trained eye, you'd be able to see that it's not CG, but I've shared this on Reddit before, and I've seen people say, wow, that's Unreal? There's no way that's Unreal. And I'm like, oh, I don't think I'm that good, but thanks. Appreciate it. So, I don't know. I have a hard time taking compliments, too. It's like... But, that being said, yeah, the main aspect of what I was doing with this was trying to show off, like I said, what this engine's capable of. And I think that the new tone mapper really pushes it to a new level. It's just insane how realistic you can get with this. And let's switch to a better camera than this one. Woohoo! Let's see. It might also help if I go into unlit mode and hide the bushes.
Do you want to break down real quick what a tone mapper is and what it does?
You're asking somebody who's an artist to explain the mathematical concepts.
Hey, I'm an artist too.
Why don't you do it? You're better at this than I am.
It's basically just a way of manipulating colors. You replace colors with other colors. So a tone mapper is basically an image of tones of different hues and colors, right?
Yeah.
And by loading up a tone mapper, you can just replace the colors that are in your scene with the colors in your tone mapper. It's used in movies and such all the time to correct colors and make scenes fit together.
Isn't that pretty much what they did with the Matrix too, to get that green hue and everything?
Yeah.
They do it in every single movie.
Oh, I'm sure they do it in every movie. I was giving that specific one. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely, absolutely.
So, in league with that also is a color grading table, which I made extensive use of. You can see the difference between it, like with and without. It's the one that I developed for this is very subtle, or at least I think it is. I wanted this scene to look overexposed. That was a common comment made about this scene, is that, hey, if this was a photograph, why is it so exposed? Why is it so overexposed? And I wanted it to look like that because a lot of this particular environment is black. Like these tank cars are black. If you take a photograph and you set your exposure lock to a black surface in broad daylight, it will blow out. That is what's going to happen. There's no way around that. That's just how photography works. Unless you set your shutter speed down to something ridiculously small, but then only the black surface becomes visible and everything else is super dark. So I kind of wanted to show that you can get photo-like realism from Unreal, even though there's no f-stop and there's no like true bokeh effect in this engine yet. Like circular DOF is not the same thing as a bokeh effect. It's close, but it's super noisy. And like if I was to change the what do you call it, the focusing on this, you'd see what I'm talking about. But if I change my debug focus frame, well, I only have to change. I can just leave it here on this Colossus of Road moniker. But change the f-stop down to, and when I said no true f-stop, I'm not talking about the actual, like the numbers in here. It's not a real f-stop. An f-stop, like in photographic terms, would be more of something that actually controls the amount of light. This is actually controlling the focus, not the amount of light coming into the shutter. So if I change this down to 1, and I bring my current aperture all the way down to 1, you'll see the background starts to blur out, but the overall lighting doesn't change. Like an aperture of 1 should make this thing blow out, completely blow out. Like it should be super bright because you're letting in so much light at that point, whereas an aperture of 22 should do more than just type it in, this is running slow. An aperture of 22 should do more than just sharpen the image. But this is a limitation of Unreal, unfortunately, and unless somebody else knows something that I don't, this is really all that the f-stop and the aperture does in the engine currently. Now if I change this down to an f-stop of 0.1, which is, I don't even think that's possible in an actual camera, you'll see how blown out that gets and how noisy it gets. And it looks like depth of field, but it's missing that awesome bokeh effect that you get from the camera shutter, the lens itself. You get like depending on the lens and the manufacturer, you can have 8-sided, 6-sided apertures that when you fully open the lens, you'll see the image blur out and the shape of the lenses themselves, and it makes an awesome effect. But you can't get that with the cinematic camera in this engine. You have to use an older physical camera, and those they don't have the same control that you have with the newer cinematic camera, which is why I switched over to it. So usually for what I'm doing, I actually have all of my settings for these cameras based off of actual Olympus lenses. This is based off of the Olympus 14 to 42 millimeter, with the lowest aperture it goes to is 4, and the highest it goes to is 22. So I've got that set up to emulate an actual lens that I'm personally shooting with. I also have a couple of telephoto lenses in here that are based off of the 70 to 300 millimeter lens that I use as well, with a slightly better depth of field just because of the focal length that it uses. Are there any other questions, or am I just talking too much?
No, there's a question. However, it's a bit off topic of what you are talking about currently. So if you want to, we could step back to the foliage a bit.
Yeah, by all means.
Meliv Lena asked, the foliage being so expensive, is that because of overdraw or because the shader is simply too complex? So if you would say disable opacity, I wonder how much it would stay in the red.
That's a good question. I don't think I want to try recompiling it right now with this stream going on, but I would say it's probably a combination of both. The material and the textures being loaded into it in concert with the opacity map and just the amount of overdraw that it has to do. I would say the overdraw is probably the worst part about it, because it's constantly rendering between alpha planes, and the more of those there are, it's like, I would say it's almost like a hall of mirror effects, because it's I'm not a programmer and I'm not a mathematician, so I don't understand all of that goes into this, but my best guess would be that it has to render a significant amount more when it has to calculate what's going on with the opacity.
Yeah.
And anytime you have foliage that's this dense, you'll definitely slow it down no matter what. I mean, if you look at the foliage tool itself, you'll see that I have most of the weeds, like these taller bushes on the ground here, the ones that are directly in front of the screen right now. There's about 13,000 instances of that, and then the actual grass itself, there's almost 500,000 instances of those in here. And then on top of that, there's about 6,000 or 7,000 pine trees, and each one of those has a buttload of buttload of alpha plants in them too. So no matter what you do, it's going to be expensive. And actually, fun fact too, one of the reasons why the palmetto bushes run so well is because they don't have transparency. If you look at them inside of the shader complexity, you'll actually see they're relatively green. They're not perfectly green, but they're good enough. They're better than these palmetto trees, or sorry, the pine trees. Like those,
oh yeah, way better.
Yeah. But you can see like the actual material itself isn't really the problem so much as the transparency of it, because the pine needles themselves show up as kind of a darkish green, but the cutouts for them are where it causes the most problem. I kind of wonder if this would run better if you actually cut the geo out for the shape of the needles and then just ran a standard shader on it without any alpha. If that would actually run
that's basically what I've been doing lately as part of the plant team at Quixel. That holds up to a certain extent. You'd normally want to do that with, for example, a LOD 0 of a plant.
Okay.
But if you do such high poly plants and you reduce the shader complexity, you're adding so many polygons eventually that the polygons are going to get more expensive than the shaders themselves.
That's a potential, but I have seen this engine handle millions at a time. But then again, I've seen engines.
Oh yeah, it's fine. Like the engine can do a lot of polygons, but you're gonna at a certain point, it will get more expensive to actually just run that transparency on just alpha cards. But then when you're talking about the shader complexity, one of the biggest things is how much of the screen space the shader is taking up, right?
Right.
So for example, if we hop on into the shader complexity mode here, it's dark green, which technically isn't that bad. If you have a dark green shader somewhere, you'd be like, yeah, that's okay. But the problem arises when the dark green is taking up, it's a good like 60% of your screen right now. And that's when those kinds of shaders start to get expensive.
It's interesting how it kind of just picks and chooses what it finds light green and what it doesn't. There's nothing here.
I think you have
it's where it's blending. I bet it's what it is, when these extra materials are blending together. That's probably
it could be, yeah. But I think you also have something in your shader, right, that changes the color of things depending on where they are? Or was that for the plants?
That's actually for the water over here. That's one of the reasons why it's so crazy looking.
Okay.
So, yeah, the water is depth-based, so the more you get into it, or the further away it gets from the camera, and the further away it gets from whatever it's touching, the deeper it looks. Same for this little ditch over here, too. So, yeah, so for... there's so much to cover in this. If I miss anything, please don't hesitate to speak up, because my brain's running at a mile a minute right now trying to figure out what I did, what I didn't do, what you guys are interested in talking about, what you think is cool about this, what you think sucks. I mean, if you don't like what you're seeing here and you want me to focus on something else, please speak up, because I'm not going to take offense to it whatsoever. One of the other things, too, I made extensive use of was the displacement mapping available with all of the stuff that comes with a Megascan material. One of my favorite materials is this ballast, the rocks that the ties sit on, which is basically what they use to stabilize the rails. With, I mean, these trains, at least in the U.S., weigh 800, sometimes like thousands of tons, right? There's just so much being basically running on these tiny little rails, and they have to find a way to space out all of that pressure that's being put on the earth, and these rocks are excellent at doing that. They're like shock absorbers to an extent, and they also prevent the thing from tipping over in areas where you start getting to places where there's water next to it, for example. This is not modeled geometry, it's all displacement, and it's nice that I'm able to use the displacement mapping from the scans, because, God, it's so much easier to do that than it is to try to build it by hand. But I can actually, this is all parameterized, right? So I can just change this at any point, make it look as dumb as I want, or make it look as realistic as I want. And I can also change how far out I want it to displace, or I can make it barely displace, let the normal map do most of the work, but then that doesn't break up the edges of it at all. So I felt that 200 of a distance was a pretty good, or sorry, a displacement strength was a pretty good kind of, what's the best way to describe it? Good midpoint. Like push the displacement itself really far out, but then have a very small distance value, which then allows me to get more of a nice rocky look. And then I can have some of them pop through the ties, so it looks like they're scattered on it from a distance. When you get up close to it, kind of breaks the illusion. I've got a camera shot underneath one of these tankers that will show that. Where did it go? Where did it go? There it is. Now just to turn the camera on, if I can actually find the damn thing. Oh, this scene's so complex. Why didn't I make this easier for myself? Where is the there it is. I have to get unlit mode because it's hidden by the shadow of the tanker. Alright. You're going to have to turn your head sideways to see this one, or you can just go to my ArtStation and look at it. But the illusion's kind of broken on this particular image, only because it's so close to it. But if I turn the rocks down just a little bit, it doesn't look too bad. Kind of helps out. So having the, again, this is all parameterized, like I mentioned before, so I keep all of this so that it's easier for me to work with, so that I don't have to give up on it mentally. It's just so draining to constantly hit a button and wait for it to compile, hit another button, wait for it to compile, or heaven forbid you have to go in and re-import an 8K texture, which takes 60 seconds on an i7 processor. It's insane. Like, whenever I had to make texture tweaks to the tankers, because these are 8Ks, I had to wait quite a while to update them, and there was no way I was going to come in here and put individual textures with their own identification markings on them. So I turned these into decals, because having to import 6 or 7 different 8K albedos and roughness and metallic for each one of these tankers was going to just... there's no way I was going to be able to do it. So they're actually just a decal sheet that's been set up with a basically just clamped UV, so I can just change them by switching between. It's like they're laid out in a grid, basically. I'll show you what that looks like. Here we are. It's like I can just go to this particular texture at any point and change which. You can't even see it in the screen for some reason. It's because it has to project onto something. You can't see what's projecting onto yet. But if I, which number is this? This is 326623, so it's probably down the line here a little bit. I think it's, nope, not that one either. Which one is it? You know what, I'll just grab this one instead. This will be easier to work with. Alright, pull that over. So yeah, there's an X position and a Y position, and I can just change how this texture displays by changing those numbers. So if I come in here and change the X position, it actually squeezes it and pushes it to the side, or I can change the Y position and determine where it goes on that particular map. So I can make it tile a bunch of times if I want, or just a couple of times. I actually use this for the graffiti sheet as well, so all of the graffiti is set up the exact same way. Whoops, that's the wrong one. It's this one. And this is an instance of a master graffiti material, which is this one right here. This is pretty simple too. It's just a script that not a script, but a material I picked up from the Unreal forums. I can't remember the guy's name, but if you look up F_UV atlasing, you'll probably find it pretty quick on Google. The albedo is plugged into the same albedo strength and clamps and all of the fun stuff. And then the gradient remap is basically a different kind of clamp that also comes from the same guy who made the UV atlasing. You should check it out. He makes some awesome scripts on the Unreal forums. Anyway, back to the point. All of this just basically controls the graffiti itself, which then it's all laid out in such a way that I can easily kind of adjust it. Ah, damn it, that's not the wrong I want it. It's this one. There we go. So this is all alpha. It's all hand painted in Photoshop. There's a couple of them that didn't make it into the end. I'm really sad that my Burger King didn't make it in. He's so cool looking. I spent so much time on him, and then in the end I just didn't put him in. You know, sometimes you just got time constraints and you just got to give up. But yeah, let me show you where that went actually, since nobody else got to see him. I also put Carl from Aqua Teen Hunger Force on there, if anybody's actually a fan of the show. There he is, hanging out right there, all pissed off, looking like normal. So, this was a fun one to do. Just, my favorite part of this whole project wasn't just the photography. It was also being able to just hand paint whatever I wanted, go into Photoshop, be like, hey, I want to make the Burger King, or I want to make Carl, or I want to complain about the 2016 election and how much I couldn't stand either candidate. And then, you know, just come in here and just slap it everywhere and hope that, you know, people would pick up on it. And my favorite one was this one over here, which, if you're familiar with Reddit at all, you might have seen this little guy's face around. He's like a stock clip art kind of guy or something from, like, he's from like 93. And somebody else had already graffitied this before, so I kind of just took the same idea and changed a couple words and made it my own thing. You know, there's a little Quixel logo, and I've plastered my name all over this thing. I go by Synesthesia on Polycount, if you've ever been there. So I just put Sin on everything that I could find the place to put it on, because I wanted to bomb this whole scene. So that was quite a bit of fun. There's also you know, little references to Orlando here too, which is where I'm from. So I put a small tribute to the Pulse shooting, if anybody's familiar with what happened there. And just tried to bring the scene some character, because when these trains sit for any length of time, it's like graffiti artists just materialize out of nowhere and just come on and start painting on it, because these guys hunt these things down looking for the ability to write on a blank canvas. And these tankers are brand new, which, to explain why they're so shiny, is because they were built in the past 3 or 4 years. They're up to the new Department of Transportation standards, so they have these giant shields on the front that are supposed to help stop them from blowing up as much as they've been doing. They're very dangerous. In the Midwest, these things blow up quite frequently. They derail and they crash on the ground, and the hull ruptures, and then any wayward spark causes the whole thing to just go up in flames. And when one of these things blows up, it's not good. It's very...
Why would anyone paint on that?
Because...
Yeah. That sounds like a suicide mission.
Because it's awesome. They don't just blow up when they sit there. They have to derail first. So, yeah, I mean, the whole concept of this was really to just... Like, this thing actually started not just with that ArtStation piece I mentioned before, the concept that I found on it. It also started from one of my college projects where I had built a warehouse, and it was going to be that generic, hey, you're a 3D artist, you need to make a warehouse to you know, to show that you can do stuff. And I was like, man, I want to do a warehouse, but I don't want to do your generic warehouse. I want to do something that has like a, you know, maybe it's like a train repair place or something. So I wanted to put some rails down inside of it, and I want to take it and just make it look like somebody broke in and just spray painted the living shit out of this place. And that's where most of this came from. But then I realized, well, you know, I'm really not too interested in doing the interior when I have this gigantic library of textures that I can just draw from. So why don't I just do something, you know, it's going to be a lot harder, but why not just do the exterior? Just make, you know, the middle of nowhere, out in the woods. See if you can do it. Why not, right? If the worst you're going to do is fail, right? So that's where we are. So, have you guys got any other questions?
Yeah.
I know I talk a lot, so I mean, don't hesitate to interrupt me.
It's fine, it's fine. It was quite a while back, but you were so into the topic, and it was about cameras.
I love cameras.
I know. Mars Buddy had a little suggestion for you, which was basically that you may be able to set some sort of driven key to add a stop to the exposure when the f-stop goes up to get a similar effect.
That's
what you were talking about then.
Actually a brilliant idea. Isn't that something you can control through, what was it, like right here? So you can just change the brightness. Yeah, that's, you know what, I remember seeing this menu, but I never thought of actually wiring it to anything. That's a really good idea. Linus, how would we go about doing that for anybody who's listening?
I don't even know what you're talking about right now.
So changing the f-stop on a camera, is there a way to link that to changing the exposure value inside of, like...
Oh, I'm sure there is. I've never done it myself. I mainly work with stylized stuff, so this whole camera thing ain't really my thing.
Well, it should
but I'm sure there's a way.
Okay. Well, if there's a will, there's a way, right? Just go and program something, even though I don't know how to program. That'd be...
I mean, the engine is open source, so you can do whatever the hell you like with it. Have fun.
Yeah, that's great. It's like telling me to just go and build a car when I've never done it before. Yeah, I'll just
Exactly.
I'll just totally
Exactly.
do that.
Just do it, John. Just do
You're gonna have to forgive me if I go over and ask you how to car though.
it.
Oh, the references.
Yeah, so you remember that one, don't you?
Oh,
Let's not go into that. That's not safe for discussion. So yeah, let me hide this foliage again, and we can kind of break down some of the other stuff that I did. So a lot of this is really just one mesh repeated over and over. I mean, this entire overpass structure is really so simple. It's almost stupid how simple it is. It's a couple of rectangles that I've just extruded outward, applied a tiling texture to. This is Megascans as well, by the way. I've got the hallmark of anything done with Unreal is repetition, right? Like repeating hallways or repeating corridors of some kind. And there you go, repeating girders holding up an overpass, repeating pylons holding up an overpass. Simple as that. I originally tried building this inside of the engine with basically like making myself prefab Legos just to move things about, and then I quickly realized that I didn't like the lack of, what's the best way to describe it, precision. There was no precision in what I was trying to do, and it's just so much easier to just do it in Max. So I did it all in Max and made a prefab out of each one of these components, and I was able to just shift drag them, or alt drag them rather, I'm thinking in Max terms, and just make new components to then bridge this together. If you're hoping there was a road up here, I'm sorry, there's no road up here. I was tempted to put streetlights up here. I did add the guardrails, so it at least appears to be that there's a road up there, but not so much if you're actually up there. Let's see. These are also just little building blocks. These little pieces right here. They're literally just the same texture and same orientation in a lot of cases, just rotated slightly or moved slightly to give it a different appearance. I even used that same block down here for the rail crossing. I thought it looked kind of stupid just doing it as a, what do you call it, as a dirt crossing. I didn't think that would, I mean, it may work, it may not, but I figured this probably isn't so out in the woods that they're not going to have enough money to lay down a small strip of concrete. So I went ahead and just threw in a couple of those blocks and just scaled them to match. It's not 100% perfect, but from most angles it works. So it was good enough for what I wanted to do, which is what you see here. And again, cameras, as I said before, are a huge component of all of this. A lot of this only comes together because of the camera work. Like, this is one of my favorite shots out of the whole scene. It's up on my ArtStation account too, if you look at this particular scene in there, which we can actually probably just link to if you guys want to see the rendered stills while we're here. Let's see, just grab it real quick. And back to Twitch. I'll put it in the channel. So, like I said, a lot of this is already in there. There's some camera angles that are not, but I feel like the compositionally wise, this came out really well. I tried to avoid throwing Fibonacci spirals in there. I don't think the golden ratio always works for everything, but it's an interesting thing to at least try to use sometimes. I did use the Unreal, what do you call it? Cinematic viewport. Yeah, I'm already in there. And occasionally I did use an actual grid to overlay this stuff, which you can do with the cinematic viewport now. You can actually get different types of grids to really kind of help align these things. If you want to separate your images into areas of interest, like maybe top right or bottom right, bottom left, bottom center, it makes it much easier to get your compositional elements focused and set up correctly. It also gives you the true output of what you're seeing from the camera rather than what you think you're going to see, which, yeah, that's no fun when you go to hit the render button and you get something completely different than what you thought you were getting. I get that sometimes with Marmoset Toolbag just because I forgot to set a safe frame. So it's kind of like setting a safe frame, pretty much. It's not exactly the same, but it's close enough that it works well. So there's that to it. I mean, and rendering these things was so easy. I mean, I literally just came in here and did a high-resolution screenshot, set the size multiplier to 3, and just rendered it out, shrunk it down, sharpened it slightly, and then threw it on ArtStation after I was done. And I did this when I had the flu, too. I was, like, day 2 into feeling like absolute crap, and I'm like, man, I have waited so long to finish this scene, and I'm not going to be stopped by the flu. That's just not going to happen. So I went ahead and did that. Speaking of scenes and whatnot as well, I think the custom water actually went really well in here. If I had the planar reflection turned on again, it would look a lot better. But I mean, I think it really kind of came together, and one of my favorite things was having people come up to me and say, "This looks like Florida. It looks like a hot, humid hellhole." I love it. I also feel like watching this, I feel uncomfortable because I feel like there's bugs crawling on my skin because I know what it's like to be out in these woods, and I know there's probably 1,000 mosquitoes just waiting to kill me. So I got a couple of those comments, which was nice, and again with the overexposure on some of this, it's designed to elicit a specific mood. I want this to look like it's hot. I mean, right now I live in Orlando, right? Outside, compared to the snowy wastelands of Scandinavia where Linus is from, it is currently, I think, almost 30 Celsius outside, and for those of you in America, it's about 91 degrees outside right now. It's hot as hell. I'm almost sweating inside of my office right now with fans running on me and the air conditioning set to 79. It's awful. So I want this overexposure to really reflect the dystopian hellhole that this state has become in the last couple of weeks. It has gone from being nice, oh, I'm biking to work, it's lovely out here, I'm not even breaking a sweat, to yesterday being like, oh god, I hate this so much. So
I wanted to announce that Jonathan is going to be personally creating the next installment in the Fallout series.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
I love that.
Congratulations.
Well, truth be told, if no politics, I'm not getting into that. All right. So
okay, let's back away.
Let's not talk about nuclear annihilation right now.
Jonathan,
yes.
You just quickly touched on the water, and we have Curious Kev asking how you went about making that. Is it a separate mesh or just texture work?
This is a separate mesh. It has to be a separate mesh for it to actually function inside of the editor. Unless you want it to make it look like a muddy pile, I suppose. Like if I... Here, let me change my... You can't see my outlier, it's on my third screen. But select this and hide it. So there's a couple of components to make the water work. The terrain shader has 5 materials in it. One of them is a copy of the main dirt, and then there's... That one is set to have like a very high reflectance value, so it's like, or not reflectance, rather roughness. The roughness is set to be very, and I guess not high, we're thinking inverse here, very low roughness. It's very muddy looking. So I want that to look like it's covered in water, right? So I come here and I turn the water plane back on, and it kind of gives you the illusion that this is a muddy lake, probably full of leeches and snakes, like water moccasins and all that other fun stuff that when you go walking in here you might not want to walk back, never come back to it again, basically. Oh, and horseflies. If you've never been bitten by a horsefly, consider yourself lucky. So the water shader is pretty simple. It's nothing particularly amazing. Let me pull it up here for you. So there's an instance of this as well, so I can change all of it. If you've never made a water shader before, it's really nothing more than just some parameterized colors and then some ripples that I processed through Endu, which is what the normal map is. It looks absolutely horrible here because it's not being controlled by anything yet. So if we go to the instance itself, we can then make this do something. So for example, I can change the color of this water at any point, make it as bright or as dark as I want. I can also change the, I believe it's the color of the edges. Nope, that's a different color. Never mind, that's a blending color. Right. The dark color, from what I remember, this has been a few months since I made this. The dark color is like the color of where it starts to blend and turn into like a depth, and the light color is where it's kind of like reflecting the sky. And let's see here. And the normals are also set based on, yeah, I can bring them up or down to kind of make it look like there's more wind, or make it look like kind of a nice, the wind's barely blowing kind of day, which is what it's set up as right now. So it's just kind of, the UVs are also in there too, like I can actually control them, so they're set to be stretched, so it looks like the whole thing is being hit by a big gust of wind. Let's see if I change the UVs down to, what is it, 1 and 1 here. Kind of looks really stupid, just like noise. So it was literally just a noise texture that I just took into Endu and just stretched it out so it looks like waves. But originally it was this way. There we go. So I was able to change the direction of the waves. I could even put a rotator on it to kind of rotate the waves depending on which direction I wanted them to look. But it was a good enough effect for the way it looked. It worked out well, I think. It's difficult to tell that it's not, I mean, from the angles that I shot it at, it's very difficult to tell that it's not waves and just
Yeah.
like a noise texture. The roughness is also controllable too. I can make this look like a giant mud pit if I wanted to,
Oh,
just
God.
by raising the roughness level. So I could do that, which doesn't look all that great. Can also bring it down to like an unrealistic value for water. I kind of felt like where it was sitting at right now is pretty good, because when it's kind of choppy like that, the sun hits it at a specific angle, which makes it kind of, the reflections take up more of the screen. I can also change the specularity of it. So if you're ever wondering what specularity does, now you know. It's just a... were you there for that conversation, Linus, the one that Billy had about trying to make...
Yes, the conversation. Yeah, that was me and Billy.
Right.
It's the specularity in Unreal is basically just an IOR controller. If any of you guys are familiar with IOR, if you're not, I suggest just googling it up. It's a little bit too big of a topic to cover here, but it's basically just you know, scientifically measured values for different surfaces and whatnot. Whereas a default value for the specular inside of Unreal is 0.5, I believe, which translates to about 1.5 IOR, which pretty much covers everything that's out there.
Yeah.
There are certain things like human skin and such that uses different IR values. And, you know, if you're one of those detail freaks that really want to get in there and get the most out of your textures, you might want to consider writing a specular map for your Unreal projects. But generally, you should only really have to do that with, you know, people's faces and that kind of stuff.
So, real quick, speaking of materials, I'm going to go ahead and share the materials that are used for this scene while I'm actually here paying attention and remembering to do it. You guys are welcome to grab that and use them in anything you want. I made them with Megascans Studio, but they are yours to do with what as you please. Please don't, aside from selling them, please don't sell them. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, so these are the textures that you're using and not the Unreal materials.
Now, I'm actually looking at the Twitch stream right now. Is the window still updating? Can you actually see the water I'm looking at? Or is it just stopped on my screen on my side?
Let's have a look. Well, it certainly
looks like it's stopped for me too. No, it moves again.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
it's just Twitch being Twitch.
You're seeing the water, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's just on my side being stupid then. Okay, then no worries. Cool. Just stopped updating for some reason. All right, so that's the material, or all the materials being used. I'm also going to give out the foliage master for the grass as well, and trees and pretty much every plant in the scene. So there you go. There's that, and the terrain master material itself, which I believe is, yep, there it is. Let me go ahead and share that too. I wish it would put the share window off of my screen instead of in the center of it where I dragged it to. Stupid program. Okay, so these are all materials that you should be able to just drag and drop into a folder that has your project containers. So Unreal should just instantly read it. So everything you'll see is what I used in here. It is not going to be sold. I got paid by Quixel to work on this, so it would be kind of odd and a little bit of double dipping to didn't go ahead and sell something that they paid me to make. I made this originally to, best way to describe it, to learn and grow and hopefully share some knowledge at the same time, but then it turned into, hey, can you know, make this something that people might, you know, find useful to learn from? And I'm like, sure, why not? We can do that. So let's see, the terrain master material I showed you guys a moment ago, but we'll go ahead and open it up again just to give you a quick rundown of what it does. This thing is fully parameterized. You can add any amount of textures to it as you desire. You can customize it, do whatever you want with it. Just don't sell it. I mean, it'd be pretty obvious that it came from me unless you modify it, but I mean, materials are easy to get these days, but I think this one is pretty good, at least for the work that I do. I'm going to keep using it for a lot of stuff. It's just very customizable and very easy to use. Alright, Unreal, why are you locking up on me? Well, while we wait for it to catch up, essentially what it does is it parameterizes literally everything in the shader. The UVs are parameterized, the specular values are parameterized, the, what do you call it? Normal strength, I believe roughness is as well, so I can bring roughness values up or down as needed. I think it's locked up, but I can't tell. Yeah, it's locked up. May have to close this and restart. No, never mind. It was saving and just didn't tell me. Cool. All right, so let's open this back up. So ignore this preview. This is not what it looks like, obviously. That's just its weird little preview for everything. Oh, that's the wrong one. That's the old one. Aha. That's the one. Silly me. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't used the little, what do you call them? These little
reroute notes.
The reroute notes, those things are so cool, man. I love them so much. I forgot how to add them, though. It's been a while since I've had to do it. Wasn't it just like right, or is it control click or something on it? Nope, that's not it.
No, control clicking, you remove it. I don't know. I think the hotkey is different in a material than it is from a blueprint. They only introduced these into materials with the latest patch.
It used to be like, I swear it was like right-clicking on it to add, but I don't see it, so no big deal. But if you remember how to add them, because it's been a while since I've had to do this, it makes it so much cleaner. It gets that spaghetti kind of cleaned up a bit. So I'll break this down. These are my UV controllers for this particular material. They're appended together, multiplied against a texture coordinate that is applied to all of the textures. Each one of these is a copy of what I've done up here, so there's no point in going back to any of them. The ambient occlusion for that particular texture is driven by the RMA pack texture, so it's called RMA out of the jargon we use for Quixel Suite. So anytime we kick out an RMA pack texture, generally speaking, it should be roughness, metallic, and ambient occlusion. But in this one, it's actually roughness, and this one should be displacement, and this one's ambient occlusion, just because it's not a metallic material. The AO is fed into a power, which is then connected to the level 1 AO, which is then lerped together with 0 and 1, so it never goes above any of those, multiplied, thrown into the layer blend. And then that, since this is the basic texture, like the most basic terrain texture, doesn't really have a height blend to it, so I didn't bother giving it one. The other textures, like this grass, for example, do. It's part of the alpha map. So that kind of helps break up where the grass meets the ground and gives it less of an alpha blend look and more of a, this is a grass growing randomly, as opposed to, oh, this weird transition just magically happens for some reason. So that fixes that up. The normal strength is controlled by this, again, this constant 3 vector, well, maybe 4 since it has an alpha map, but I just call it a 3 vector from the old Unreal days. Roughness is also adjusted by a power node and a strength into the multiply, which is also, these are just expressions of 0 to 1 that are just basically controlling those particular looks. So I can use this power node is almost like a, and that's why I call it levels, is almost like running Photoshop levels on it. Almost. It's not the same thing, but it's very close. And then I can adjust the black to white values of that purely by using the multiply with the strength, which then you can actually see what it does here when I play with it in a second. So if I open this up and pull it to the side and go to a spot where you can actually see all this dirt and stuff. There we go. So I can make this dirt as shiny as I want or as dull as I want, which is awesome. So level 4 is this white gray dirt that we have here in the state. I can change the specular value of it, which doesn't seem to do much because it's already kind of not very reflective, but roughness can be changed. Hold on, I think it's the, nope, that's not it either, it's one of these. Oh, I also have the height blend parameterized too, so the height determines, like the height blending strength actually determines how strong the transition is between the alpha map and the surrounding. So like you can see the pebbly specks there. Let's make this a little easier to see. So the levels will also change how strong that is. So if I bring up the numbers, it makes it more aliased looking and less soft. And if I change the strength, it also determines how far away from that it actually shows up. So if I change the levels down, you can see it starts to pop out more. And if I change it down to 0.1, for example, it starts to give you that kind of crappy alpha blend look that I'm trying to avoid. So let's see, where's the roughness value? Roughness. I could have sworn there was a roughness strength in here. Maybe it's, where did it go? Alright, let's try a different one. Maybe the grass has it. I just forgot to put it on the other one. Let's hide this grass. That'll make it easier to see. Alright, so the grass should have it too. So I can actually change this and make it stronger, or why is it not doing what I wanted it to do? There's something here I screwed up and I'm not entirely sure what it was just yet. Give me a second to think. maybe it's just not updating and it takes a second to do it because it's so complex. Something is funky and I don't know what it is. Odd. Level 3 should be the grass. Yeah, it is. Alright, well, either way, just because it doesn't work now doesn't mean it doesn't work. Let's put it that way. The ambient occlusion should actually do what I want it to do. Yeah, see, I can actually control the AO, so make it as bright or as dark as I want. You can see the difference in the looks here, too. If I could change the AO to the actual value it was before, which is about 2 or 3, it looks more like grass and less like this. This is not useful in real time. And you could bypass this by just kind of blending the AO into as a multiply over the texture itself, the albedo texture inside of Photoshop or whatever tool you use. But I like the ability to change that. I like to change it on the fly if I don't like how strong it is, or I think it needs to have more strength. Not being locked into that specific grass look is nice. I really like that ability to change it on the fly at any point. This looks like grass to me. Especially grass around here. I mean, it's all rough and dark and kind of crunchy, so it really looks like this to me, being where I'm from. But other people's grass.
Speaking of not being useful whatsoever, I'm going to be heading out to play some Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh man,
I could think of anything less that I'd rather do.
All right, you guys have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah, cheers.
Have fun. Cheers.
I'll have to say that in Swedish next time.
Yeah.
Just for him.
I suppose so.
What do you mean you suppose? That wasn't up for debate.
It wasn't. It wasn't.
All right. Back to what we were doing. So let me actually... Oh, you know what? I see what happened. We need to reopen the scene. Let me just hit a new level and then open it back up so nothing changes in this particular one. Something screwed up in that particular material, and that's why it wasn't showing any of the changes, I believe. Alright. Let's try that again. Sorry about the wait, guys. Any other questions in the meantime while I'm waiting for this thing to go?
No, currently not, apart from the beautiful request for adding bug skins, which would be beautiful.
Did you just say bug skins?
Bug skins. Like a Megascans library full of bugs.
Okay. So I see what's going on here. I know exactly what this is. That is the height value. I need to change that back to where it was. Watch this. There we go. That fixes it. Haha. That was stupid. So yeah, you can see the power of these parameters. I completely forgot that that's how strong that gets. Like if I change that height strength even more, it basically shoots that particular blend for that gray dirt all the way out to the tiles of the terrain material. So leaving it at around 1 for this particular material is probably a good idea. Unless you really want to make it look it's all blocky or Minecraft-like, in which case, have fun, I suppose. But as you bring the levels up and down, it's probably better to just play with the levels, because you can kind of make things pop in or out as you desire, rather than being locked into that giant blocky, horrible, god-awful look that we just had a second ago. Now let's see if the actual roughness will change now too, now that I've fixed that weird blending that we had a second ago. So yeah, now it's changing. It was the dirt overriding everything else. That's what it was. So you can see the roughness in the background changing. That grass looks like super shiny. So if we change that back to where it was, see. But it's nice that you, like, again, this is the strength, and this is what the strength of the way I'm working, and what really made me get this whole project done was working parameterized. Because if I had done this having to tweak things by updating shaders, I would not have done as much work that I did. I would have given up a long time ago.
I mean, it's really a beautiful setup and a beautiful way to work for you. It's really hands-on, which I quite like.
Right, and the downside to it, though, like I said, is if your team if you're watching this and you're working with an indie team or a AAA studio, and your team isn't working this way, and you try to do this yourself, you're probably going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
Because again, heads will explode when they try to figure out what you did, and if they can't replicate what you did, and they don't understand why you set things up the way you set them up, then you're not helping your team. You're making your work look good, But if it's not going to be usable in a team environment, then there's no reason to do that. Just if you have a lead on your team, then follow your standards and work with that. Don't try to, reinvent something. Just work with what they've given you, and everything should be fine. If you're doing personal work, or if you start a project off with an instance setup like this, which I would recommend doing anyway, just because if nothing else, you have that control, and it's so cheap that you're really hurting not doing it, because it's so much faster to change things and see them in front of you changing than it is to wait and update and wait and update and wait and update. And like I said, heaven forbid you have to change anything in the terrain shader, because if I went back and updated the terrain master material itself and not the instance, we would be waiting for over 2,000 shaders to update. Like, it would take so long for it to finish recompiling. It is insanely slow. So that being said, it is now 3:19, and this has gone by so fast, so we need to really well, I need to focus more so we can kind of cover some more ground here. I've covered camera setups, but I don't think I covered everything that I did in them, so I'm going to go and mention one other thing that I found really useful working on this. If you guys don't use HDRs for your environments, please start looking into doing it. 2/3 of the visual look of this scene comes from using HDRs. The sky itself is from, I believe, hdri-skies.com, or if you just type in HDRI skies on Google, you should probably get them. I think this is HDRI number 198 on the site. It's a 4K image. It's free to use for pretty much anything. If you need something larger than that, I think they sell them at a pretty affordable price of like $20 for 15K material, which is not a bad deal. The camera uses the HDR file to light the scene. The skylight uses the scene itself to light the scene, and the skybox is the best way to describe it is an 8-bit JPEG now turned into a 16-bit PNG because of banding issues I was getting in the sky. Just because 8-bit wasn't enough to properly show the levels that were in it, you'd see like blocks. You can still kind of see it even at 16-bit, but using the ambient cube map inside of Unreal really pops this thing out so much more. You can see it right here. So this is the sky I'm using, right? This is what you see here. This is being used as an HDR file with no compression, and sRGB is turned off, all that fun stuff. You can change anything about it that you want to change in here, but I've pretty much left it at default. But I've actually used the camera setting in the ambient cube map to use that sky to light the scene up on top of what you already see. Now, you may or may not like what you're seeing here. I think it adds a lot to it. If I turn it off completely, I feel like it's really got something missing. Like, just the lighting from the scene itself, I don't think is enough to carry it. I think it needs the ambient cube map itself to pop it out. Because if I put it back where it was, you can actually see the trucks, the wheel assemblies of the freight train, whereas before they were just kind of black. Well, not entirely, but mostly. Popping that back out, to me, really makes those areas of interest visible. Like, they're just so dark otherwise. And since it's the same sky and the same HDR, the lighting is really where it should be. It's exactly what it should look like. So it's not like you're using a different HDR from like Mars or something to try to light the environment up. It's the same environment, the same sky, and the same skybox, all pushing together different values and playing with them one by one. And if you look at the skylight itself, it's not anything particularly amazing either. It's actually using distance field ambient occlusion. Like, if I set this back to stationary, you'll see the difference. Like, all of the AO that was underneath here is now gone. But the DFAO really pushes the scene to a new level too. And if you're not using distance fields to light your project, I highly recommend looking into Epic's documentation on how to do that. It's a very easy setup. You just have to go into your edit project settings and then set the distance field rendering to on inside of your rendering settings. And then you just set this to movable, and then it should automatically set the, the DFAO. And you can even change any of that at any point. You can bring the contrast of it up, bring it down. Yeah, it's a very, very useful tool, and it's so easy to play with that there's no reason not to do it unless you're really concerned about performance. One of the reasons why this runs so slow is because of the distance fields. The DFAO is very expensive when there's this many scene or meshes in the scene, and it causes problems, but I feel like for single renderings like this, it's really worth the trade-off in performance. There's days I hate at life having to constantly hide the foliage, like you've seen me doing through here just to get a decent frame rate. But in the end, when I go to render the camera settings out, I feel like it was worth the trade-off because I was proud of what I made and I wasn't feeling like I made a trade-off in quality, but rather I'd rather trade off performance rather than quality for something I'm rendering out for people to see. If it was a game, definitely take the performance over the quality. Nobody cares how good it looks if they can't play it. Like if you tried, I can't even render a 360 screenshot in this thing. I've tried doing it, it crashes unreal. I can get it to play in the editor and it runs horribly, but the second I hit the 360 Ansel screenshot, boom, right to desktop every time. It just cannot do it. So the again, the skylight uses the captured scene itself, so you can bring the settings for that up or down. I kind of, in retrospect, almost wish I had brought it up more because it looks a little bit better with it being set to 9 or so. It really brings the side of the train out more, and it really makes it look even more exposed, which is kind of where I wanted it to be. But I think 3.5 is where I commit it to, and it looks like it works, so nothing to complain about. So skylights are a huge component of how this thing looks. Without the skylight, it would be kind of dull. You need a skylight in everything you do, pretty much, unless you're making, even an interior. I think it would have a slight skylight or something, so nothing becomes pure black. So it's a pretty useful and helpful tool to have. What else is there to this besides the camera work? Yeah, I mean, pretty much all of this is just spending the time to make the meshes, spending the time to learn how the materials work, and finagling everything together in such a way that when people looked at it, they didn't say, wow, this thing really sucks. Why did you spend so much time on this horrible thing? Because, oh god, that's what I was terrified of the most, was the reception. I was hoping that this would be received well. And overall it was, and I'm happy about that, but there's always ways to improve this. So I think that's one of the learning curves from this, is just being like, hey, I know I did something good, but I know I can do way better than this if I just spend the time on it. And again, like I said before, if I can do this, any of you guys can. If you're a student, if you're, you know, a AAA guy and you don't have a whole lot of time in your spare time to make this kind of stuff, you know, don't despair. Like, don't ever compare yourself to someone on their best day. It's like when you go on Facebook, right? And then somebody's like, oh man, I just went across the world and I won $1 million and I got all the jobs and I got all the raises and I'm like the best, right, dude? And then you look at that and then you're thinking about it at like midnight and you're like, oh man, my life kind of sucks in comparison. But it's like, don't make that mistake where you're like, oh god, everything's so bad for me because I'm looking at this awesome thing that this person did and mine isn't as cool. It's like, don't compare yourself to other people in that way. Like, whatever you're doing is probably good enough. Just keep trying to improve yourself, and everything that you'll do will become better if you've got the talent for it and the ambition to make it happen. I mean, you don't want to see the stuff I started making when I was first doing this. It's horrible. I don't even think I didn't even know how to use the rotation feature in Max to move the viewport around. I used to make game maps for a really old game, and I would make the entire map from one viewport at one 45-degree angle because I didn't know any better and didn't realize that I could rotate the viewport. And I had to work from the entire view in one angle, and that was it. And that's the like, just thinking about it, it's like, how did I not know that I could just rotate? It's 3D.
Yeah.
Like, how
but
did
we all make these mistakes, trust me.
Oh, this was like 2001, so it was a long time ago. But I mean, everybody starts somewhere, right? So
Exactly.
yeah. So again, back on the cameras, which is really kind of what I wanted to talk about with this. Make sure you're using a cinematic camera. These things make so much of a difference in the way this looks in the end. It's just night and day difference between without a camera and with. And the lookup table too. Like, if you haven't made a lookup table yet, it's as simple as making a default camera, or even just looking at your scene with no post-processing. Taking the LUT itself from Unreal. If you Google color lookup table, Unreal 4 on Google, you should be able to get the LUT itself. You just take that, place it inside of your screenshot in Photoshop. You lay that on top of it, and then you just kind of throw levels and effects and all sorts of other stuff on top of that as not styles, but layers themselves, like adjustment layers, and then get the look that you want. So you can take it from this to this. Like, I wanted the brights to be blown out, and I wanted the midtones to be slightly higher, and I wanted the darks to be a little darker, so there's more contrast. But I wanted to be kind of subtle. I mean, it's not terribly subtle when you look at it here, because you're seeing A versus B, but compared to, you know, other LUTs I've seen where it's like, oh, let's make it like autumn looking, so the whole thing turns blue for some reason. I wanted to just enhance what was already there without really shifting the color tones too much. So like the yellows basically stayed yellow, the blues mostly stayed blue, the reds kind of shifted a little bit towards blue, but not much. That kind of thing. The LUTs are a huge, like Linus said, it's almost like a tone mapper in a sense, and almost everybody uses it, so there's really no reason not to. And don't be afraid to play with the tone mapper until you get something you like. I mean, there's nothing wrong with just playing with different values, getting a specific mood and look. Like, even with the tone mapper, or sorry, the LUT that I used for this, I could still make it look less washed out if I wanted to, or less blown out, rather. Like, this, to me, actually looks like a picture. Like, a more, like, almost like a Polaroid picture, if anybody's familiar with Polaroids from, like, the early 90s and the 80s. This looks like a Polaroid photo to me. Like, if I add a little yellow tint to this would look like somebody had just snapped it with one of those auto printing cameras and then pulled it out and like had to shake it to dry it off. That's what it would look like. But, you know, with DSLRs being what they are today, or, I mean, even the camera I use isn't a DSLR anymore because it's completely mirrorless. Like, getting this kind of look is super easy, especially when you have the subject there. Like, if you trekked out to a train yard and took pictures like this, you could get something like this just as easily. Except, I mean, way easier, because all you have to do is drive out there. You wouldn't have to build this entire fucking scene. Pardon the language, of course. So, if you take anything else out of the stream, please, like, keep in mind your camera work is such a huge component to how the entire thing is going to look. The entire mood, the feel, the emotion that you want to convey is going to come out of your camera work. I can't stress this enough. Your composition only can take you so far. Your ability to play with light and bring it to the way you think it should look is going to determine how other people react to it, for good or better or worse, really. I mean, what I think looks good may be something you don't. What you think looks good may be something I don't think looks good. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all have our own opinions on how things should look. But to me, this conveys the look of a summer's day in Florida perfectly. The super brightness, the very harsh wilderness in the background. If you've never been to this state, if you go walking through those woods, you're going to come out bloody because of how many bugs and insects are in it, but the plants themselves will attack you because they have thorns and stuff all over them. So to me, like, this is my home. For better or worse, this is where I live, and this is what it looks like to me. And I wanted to convey that through that so that people who've never been here would be like, oh, wow, maybe I don't want to come here after all. And to that I say good riddance. We have too many people here. But but in all seriousness, are there any other questions, Jacob, or are we...
No, the chat is actually rather quiet.
That's interesting. I would have expected people to be chatterboxes about this. So... Let's get away from cameras for a while, since we've talked about those at length. And we didn't really touch on the foliage shader, so let's kind of do that while we still have a half hour here. And we can go a little longer if possible. I actually had my wife take the kids out for a while, so I don't mind staying for another half hour or an hour until they get back. But if it's going to be tough to show anything off with this scene being the way it is, and how tough it is to get a consistent frame rate in anything. Let's open up the foliage shaders. Alright, so, and the funny thing is I can't even select the foliage itself to get the material that each one is using, because you can't just select it inside of the foliage editor to get that. You have to select each mesh, but that's easy enough. Let's just go ahead and grab the material for it here. So, for example, let's go to, let's see here. So these plants over in the corner, God, this thing is so slow. Sorry about the delay here to get to where we're trying to go. These little leafy, weedy looking plants. Ah, lens flares. J.J. Abrams up in this bitch. Okay, here we are. Ah, come on, stop rotating so fast. Little by little, there we go. Okay, no more touching the rotation, because it's just going to fly off the screen. So these plants right here, these are, again, they're all Megascanned. So they have that as an input. And I believe it's this texture it's using, or this material. Alright. Come on, load the texture. I know you're having a hard time rendering it because there's so much stuff, but you can do it, Unreal. I believe in you. Okay, so this is all, again, parameterized. If you have Unreal open right now and you have the materials that I gave out earlier, you can actually open these up and look at them in real time. If you want to look at the actual node network itself, I mean, we can kind of follow along. Actually, this is the older one. I'm sorry. Let me grab the original real quick. Close this already, would you please? I'm going to hide the foliage. There's just no way around it. It's too intensive. There we go. That's better. So these actually have subsurface scattering in them. In addition to that, they also have roughness controls, specular controls. I can control how much depth and how much reflectiveness they all have. It's really, really quite nice, actually, because plants, to me, are the hardest things to do in this engine, only because they... What's the best way to describe it? They're hard. They're just hard to do, to get them to look accurate. If they look good from one angle, sometimes they can look bad from another. If they look bad from that angle, they can look great if you just rotate the light ever so slightly. It's almost like, to get plants to look better, we have to move out of alpha cards and start using, like, not just the cards themselves, but actually start tracing around the geo with the actual the mesh itself, like we were talking about with Linus earlier, where maybe saving on overdraw would be to start using like actual mesh cutouts of each one of these leaves on the plant itself using the same atlas, which would theoretically improve performance at the cost of having a ton of man hours to do the work, but also, you know, it would hopefully significantly improve just the frame rates by not having to render everything behind it constantly. It's also possible to adjust the strength of the albedo with this. I can make it as bright or as dark as I want. I can change... Let's just actually just go to the material master itself. This is a little complex, not terribly. So the albedo is actually controlled by a desaturation node. I can throw that up or down as I desire. If I think it's too saturated or not saturated enough, I can bring it up or down. The S-curve is also controlled by a parameter as well, just a standard constant. I can bring that up or down to kind of bring out darks and lights as desired. This is then multiplied, so I can bring the black and white values up uniformly as I wish. This is then blended with an overlay, kind of like how Photoshop overlays work, where the idea is to get this to be flat gray and then blend it together with a color. So I can change the color to anything, and I can make it look dead, or I can make it look lively, or I can make it look blue or pink, or really whatever I feel like. The normal strength also controls all the vectors in the normal to make the light scatter better on the model. Again, purists and some artists will tell you that what I'm doing is wrong. To me, it's subjective. It's not bad to do this. It's not good either. It's really whether or not you care about what the end result looks like. If you don't care if it's mathematically accurate and you just think it looks good, then this is a perfectly acceptable solution. If you're pragmatic about it and you realize that the end user of whatever you're doing is not going to recognize that the mathematical formula inside of the normal map doesn't match what it should, and the B value should not be touched or something, then it's fine. If somebody can actually see that, then it's not fine. Or it wouldn't be fine if you're in a team environment and you went doing this without telling anybody, and then they have to replicate what you did later on. That's not fine either. You need to make sure that it's on the up and up with whoever you're working with. Or if you're doing it by yourself, then it doesn't really matter. As long as it looks good in the end, that's the only thing that matters. No matter what anybody tells you, the only thing that matters is the end result. If it's mathematically correct, but it looks stupid, you better believe I'm going to break it so that it looks right. Would you agree with that, Jacob?
I totally agree with that. That's something we've touched on older streams already, that you don't have to focus on whether the values you're giving your textures are 100% physically correct.
Right.
It's whether or not the end result looks the part.
And that's also because PBR itself as a system is not entirely correct. It's the best approximation we have now to how actual lighting works. Now,
exactly, it's based, not correct.
Right. It's not called PCR, it's called PBR. But that doesn't mean that you should just break the rules that are there willy-nilly. You should do it only when it actually needs to be done. So in this case, I do it to make the plants look like they have more depth to them. And I'll show you that in a second after I go through the rest of this. So this is the same fare as we saw earlier with the terrain shader. The roughness is controlled by a multiply and the roughness strength. There's a little bit of post-processing to the albedo, which is done with a speed tree color variation, which allows you to get like a small breakup in the color values of all of the different instances of that particular material. It is... what's the best way to describe it? It's very useful. You can easily get a subtle look difference between all of the different plants that you have there, so that they don't look exactly the same. on every single instance of it. There's nothing worse than seeing the same tree in the same, like, it doesn't rotate, it doesn't kind of like lean over or anything, it's just in the same position, the same colors in every single spot you put it in. That looks fake. It looks like somebody's bad approximation of what CG should look like. If you can give it variance, you should, because real life is nothing but a variant of something else. Even, you know, leaves on a tree will still look different from one another, even though they came from the same tree. The same with another tree. You put two trees next to each other, they're going to have their own character and their own appearance. You should try to replicate that in here if possible, and the color variant really helps with that, even if ever so slightly. It's one of those things where if you don't have it, you'll probably wonder why, like, something looks off and you may not be able to put your finger on it. It's probably one of those things where you don't have enough color variation to it. So on top of that, I've got specular power being derived from the roughness in this particular case. I could have gotten it from the albedo, but the albedo was too dark. So I use that to break it up. Again, you'll have people telling me, or telling you if you use this, that it's wrong. This is a technique that I think works. I don't care about the math behind it so much as the appearance. If the appearance looks okay, then I'm going to push it. That's just how I work. The translucency / subsurface scattering is controlled by a simple controller, which is multiplied by the alpha. Sorry, that's not the subsurface scattering. That's the actual, in Unreal's terms, like, the SSS is controlled by the opacity, but it's not the color of the SSS. It's just how much light comes through the leaves. The subsurface is actually driven by the texture. The Megascans on the site usually come with, if it's a plant, it'll come with its own set of translucency. You can then control that with its own color if you want, and you can multiply that against it. That's how I like to work with it. I probably should have thrown the desaturation in front of that so that this would take up more of the coloration and tint that less and color it more. Really, if you break this and do anything you want to it, that's probably one of the things I would do, is move this node behind it and then put the multiply in front with the SSS strength. And then you get the color from that. That's pretty much all this is, and that's used on every single one of these trees. There's a variant that I made specifically for the palmetto trees, just to make them a little bit more, what's the best way to describe it? A little bit more easy to work with in terms of frame rates. I get kind of sick of not being able to like adjust things quickly. So again, if I can keep things relatively good in frame rate, I will. Let me throw a grass in here, and I'll show you what I'm talking about with the normal breakup. And I'll leave it to you if you like it or if not, but that's what I used for this particular scene, so it will kind of help understand the thought process I had going into it. Let's see here, grassy clump. So,
Jonathan,
yeah.
May I interrupt you right there?
Sure.
While we're talking plants, Ika's Art has the question whether or not you could take time to explain a bit more about how you go on creating atlases with Quixel Suite and Megascans.
So that's a great question. So let's go ahead and minimize Unreal for a second. The atlases actually come from the Megascans library. I don't actually make atlases, generally speaking, like, unless it's the graffiti atlas or the decal atlas that I made earlier. But the plants, if that's what we're talking about currently, let me actually go to the search and grab that real quick. Alright, so here's an atlas that comes on the site automatically. This is pretty much how the textures that I used were set up. So you have leaves on the side, and then you can just cut these out inside of Maya or Max or whatever modeling tool you use. Say you use Modo or Lightwave or Blender or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. You can then create a plant from these scanned leaves and stems. Like, you would have one plane for this particular piece, another plane for that, and then you would just take those planes and move them around and copy them and paste them and shape them into the generic look of whatever this plant is supposed to be. This is a vine, so you would have this crawling up a wall more than likely, or it doesn't even have to be used that way. You can think outside of the atlas, so to speak, and turn this into a tree if you really wanted to. If you like the way these leaves look, it could be a giant bush, a tree, or you could just leave it as a vine if you want. Like I said, a lot of the plants in here are nothing more than, let's see if I can actually show you one of the ones that I used on the site, or on the project itself. Like that leafy bush from a second ago is this one right here. It's just this. But there's another version of that, I believe, that has a lot of the stems broken off, so I was able to shift those around and turn it into its own kind of unique plant. And part of the challenge of this project too is that these are all scans from the Nordic countries, and some of them are from Pakistan. Plants from Sweden do not look like plants from Florida unless they're built in a specific way. So I used, like, this is the one I used right here, I believe. So I just kind of took these plants and kind of built out the stems and just traced around what was here. Like I would make a plane here and then maybe add another cut there and a cut here, maybe another cut there to kind of give it a little bit of depth, and then move the cuts around so that the plant appeared to have leaves that weren't just straight out. You know what I mean? Like if I tried to bend this as a single plane, it would look really dumb because it's obviously made out of many different planes. It's not just one plane. So giving it a few cuts kind of helps break the illusion that it's just one flat image. And then just adding these in at random points on it to try to build a plant out of it is pretty much how I did that. So let's bring Unreal back up. So I'll even bring that plant up a second ago that we were talking, or I was just talking to you about. Here it is. So you can see,
beautiful.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I built it. It's all really all it is. This thing maybe has 50 polygons, I think. So it's pretty basic. Nothing particularly amazing. You put a bunch of them together and it starts to look okay. You put one by itself, it looks kind of goofy. It's not meant to stand alone. But you'll see the difference here in the reason why I used these instances the way I did. So let me deselect this mesh. And we'll keep the camera kind of close to it so you can see the reason why I have the normal vectors adjusted at all. So if I change the normal strength from 4, 4, and 0.5 down to 1, 1, and 1, you see how flat that looks? I don't like that at all. If I put that back at 0.1, suddenly you start getting depth in the plant. Put it at 4 and 4, and it starts grabbing more light. It's not physically accurate to do this, and it's not accurate to the math behind a normal map to do this. It's not technically adjusting the strength of the normals. It's kind of bending the vectors in a way that, again, would make some veteran game artists' heads explode. And this is why I don't recommend that you do it the way I'm doing it unless you're doing it at the beginning of your project, going into it understanding the limitations of this, because it's not recommended because you could just edit the normal map to do this. But I'm the kind of person who doesn't like to edit normal maps constantly. I don't want to have to go back into it, overlay the normal map with Undo, adjust the levels, and do all the fun stuff, and then kick it back out. It's generally recommended that when you have to do adjustments like this, that you should do it to the source material. So say, for example, I built a tank, and I don't like the way the bolts look on the tank. They're too soft. It's better to go to the source material and make the bolts pop out more than it is to try to finagle something out of Photoshop and adjust levels, because then you break other things in the process. You're not just adjusting the bolts, you're adjusting the entire texture, which can then throw anything else out of whack. But since this is all from a scanned 2D image, and it's in a game engine, there's certain concessions that I'm willing to make to try to make things look better for real time. If this was like an offline renderer like Arnold or something, it would probably look perfectly fine just giving it the input maps the way they were set up. That's generally how we do things at Quixel anyways, is using Arnold to render stuff, and it looks pretty good. But for Unreal and other real-time solutions, you kind of have to, well, I feel that you kind of have to push these things a little bit further. You can't just settle for what's already there. We've already seen what happens with the grass. Because there's no shadowing in the grass, it ends up looking like this instead of like what we're going to have in a second. So like I go to this and I change the L3 ambient occlusion to 0, and you get that instead. This is technically physically accurate, but I think we would all agree that it does not look like grass. It looks like pieces of grass thrown on top of a green carpet. Now from a distance, it works. When you get up real close to it, it does not. If I put it back to where it was, suddenly that looks like grass, doesn't it? Same principle applies here. So to me, this helps break these planes up, because I mean, this is really nothing more than an alpha card. It's 2 planes with a couple of cuts and a little bit of a rotation with a noise, what do you call it? A noise modifier applied in max, just to kind of break it up ever so slightly. That's all it is. And there's 3 variants of it, and something like, what is it, like 15 or 30,000 different plants of these 3 in there. So it helps cover a lot of ground. And the same thing with this one too. Like if I go to the material for this and then actually grab the normals and change those back down to the default, let me deselect that. So if I put that back down to 0.1, to me that looks better than this does. There's more depth. You can see the light is actually playing off of the leaves rather than it looking like it's flat. There's some value to the way this looks. It's not bad, I just don't think it punches out enough. That's why I like it the way it is here. because it's kind of a nice balance between it being 100% flat and physically accurate and all that other fun stuff, and being more artistically, you know, minded. Like, this to me looks better. This to me is something I like. And if I go in here and change the subsurface scattering, I can actually, you know, change any bit of this material I want. I can get rid of that dark green. I can make it turn red if I want. So like the plant's full of blood, for example, or I don't know, I can make it pure white and look like it's full of milk if you really wanted to. But to me, like the subsurface and all the other things combined together make this look more believable. Doing that extra little bit of work and using that foliage master material on the entire scene and constantly just adjusting things and playing with values, I think pushes these things to the next level. And making it so it's easy to do, I just cannot stress it enough. Instances are my best friend in this program, and I hope they'll be your best friend too, because there's just nothing quite like the feeling of being able to say, I don't like this, I'm going to press a button, now I like this. Rather than, I don't like this, I have to go back and change 15 different things, re-import, wait however long it takes to re-import, and then wait for the shaders to rebuild and all that fun stuff. And then, to me, that takes the whole fun out of what I'm doing. So, we have 10 more minutes. If there's any questions, you guys are more than welcome to ask. I think this has gone pretty well. I hope I've covered enough. Maybe I'll go over some of the props while I'm here too. Again, this is all textured either with Megascans or Quixel Suite 2. Like for example, these pieces of wood were done with ZBrush and Suite 2. The oil on top was just a mask that was generated from the ambient occlusion to give it kind of a nice bit of breakup on the surface to look like it's been treated for weather. These little components here, which if you never saw, it actually has the company logo on it. little Easter eggs here and there. These little poles here are actually pretty common in the state. They just tell people, and across the U.S. really, they just tell people there's a electrical cable or whatever else buried here. It's the same with these little flags. If you didn't notice, these little flags even have subsurface scattering too, to kind of make them look like they're plastic and very thin. Same thing with these pieces of wood over here. This is literally just a railroad tie that I've adjusted in Unreal and made larger and smaller. They're grouped together, so when I adjust the wood, it actually adjusts the sign too. Sign was done in Suite 2, part of an atlas. If you actually find that interesting, let me select. Oops, that's wrong. There we go. Thought I was gonna ungroup that, but I didn't. I ended up opening up the GIF maker thing that I have instead. The rails again were done in Suite 2, modeled in Max. Everything in here is modeled in Max. I'm not a Maya user, so I can't really tell you how to use that for this particular project, unfortunately. I apologize there. What else? The terrain was painted by hand. Everything in here was just done with the terrain tool, just painting everything in piece by piece. You can see what I mean about compiling shaders. Imagine waiting for that when it says 2,000 of them every time you change something. Not a whole lot of fun. But I mean, painting this terrain in is like super easy. I apologize for not covering it earlier, but it's as simple as just coming in here and adding a little bit of strength to it, kind of adjusting it down, and then just building it up piece by piece until it kind of looks more natural and rather something that makes it gives a nice accent to the scene, makes it look like a dirt road or, you know, maybe a little prairie or something in the woods. Kind of like, you know how Bob Ross would do it, right? Happy little trees, happy little prairies, happy little patches of dirt.
Oh god. Milive Lena wants to know whether or not you UV'd your models in 3ds Max or in a third-party program.
Everything in here was done in Max, including UVs. I do all my UVs in Max. I will admit, however, I do not pack them by hand. This is all done with a tool called UV Packer. I pack that. It is literally called UV Packer. I pack that. It's an interesting name. That is, again, one more time, it is literally called UV Packer. I pack that. I'm not entirely sure why it's called that. I think it could have just been stuck with I pack that or UV Packer, but I guess you have to say the whole thing. I lay out my UVs, get them all to the right texel density I want. For example, like on the exterior of these tankers, this is an 8K texture. These wheels are a 4K, so there are two different materials applied to this. There is inconsistent texel density throughout this entire model. Like these railings that you can step on are actually of a higher texel density than the the body is, and some of the smaller components are a higher texel density than the body is, and some of the parts that you can't see as well are smaller, just to be able to get the most out of the 8K that I could. 8K is huge, not so huge when you're working on something that is like 30 meters long. So for it to hold up and look good up close, it has to be optimized correctly. What you can't see needs to be hidden or reduced in texel density, and what you can see needs to be kept prominent. Otherwise, you end up with something that looks kind of blurry throughout. If anybody tells you that consistent texel density is the most important thing, I will respectfully disagree with that. Consistent texel density is only important when you don't have a gigantic model or parts that you can't see. If you can't see it, there's no point in giving it UV space. There's parts on the inside of this tanker which you can't really see too well because of the light being what it is. Maybe if I pop this thing up and make a copy of it, you'll be able to see it. Or, you know, I can just rotate it too. I guess I can do that. Woohoo, there we go. So, like the bottom of these wheels do not have the same resolution as the sides of it do. The springs don't have the same resolution as the sides because the springs don't need as much. The inside of these wheels, and yes, I did actually model all of this. Like, you can actually go inside of all of this. And let me change the speed of the camera so I don't fly through it too fast. You can actually go inside of this and look inside of it. So it's pretty much scale accurate. Like, I could sell this if I wanted it to, but I think it's just kind of cool to have as something to play with. But the inside of this is not the same res as the outside because you can't see it as much. Which is why 4K on this looks good. But if I had used a 4K map and didn't discriminate on what should be more important and what shouldn't, this whole thing would look blurry. There's just no way around that. Like, these caps actually have more depth to them on the axles than they do, like, for example, if this is larger than this. If it wasn't, you wouldn't be able to read what it says, where it says AAR 27 Class K, Quixel 8 times 2.5-8. Those are actually numbers and stuff, except for Quixel. You're not going to see that. That's just a little Easter egg I added. But the rest of that is actually railroad accurate. Same thing with all these numbers and everything, too. This is all something you see on here, except for the Q. That's usually a manufacturer's logo, but since we built this, it's got a Q on it. So, consistent texel density is important for the stuff that you can see. For the things that you cannot see, it is not as important. For the things that turn blurry when you try to give them detail, you need more texel density. There's no way around that. If you have tiny pieces that have bolts on them and you try to give them detail, it's going to look bad. Again, there's nothing you can do about that. That's just the nature of the beast. Like these little components right here actually have a little bit more res, so those bolts look good. If I didn't, and I painted those in Endu, they would look, frankly, like blurry smudges. Same with some of these other components down here, where there's little bolts and stuff on the edges. I had to give that more res. If I didn't, it wouldn't look good. There's a lot of dirt on the bottom of this thing, isn't there? Jeesh. Hey, it almost looks like you got a train wreck, doesn't it? Like I could toss one of these to the side. Now we just need some...
You could. You can still extend on the scene.
Yeah, I guess I could. Like, what happens when somebody tries to make it derail, right? Just need some explosions.
Maybe an exploded one on the side.
Maybe we call it Michael Bay meets Florida Ethanol train, right?
Yeah, why not?
So again, with some of these other parts too, like this signal, unwrapped in Max, packed in iPack that, textured in Dedu and Endu. All the bolts and everything were done in Endu and Dedu. All the little details like the glass. I mean, literally, this glass is just a noise map. I'm not joking. It's a noise map in Photoshop with a radial blur, and then I take that into Endu and turn it into glass. So it looks like notched glass, essentially, like ribbed glass. It's super easy to do. It's like one of those old tricks from like how to make what do you call it, brushed steel. Back in the day when you had to do a lot of that crap with Photoshop filters. Just one of the, because I've been doing this so long, I just remembered. Oh yeah, add some noise and make it spin. There you go. Instant glass. It's better than trying to photo source it or build it by making rings, concentric rings out of paths. It was just faster to do it this way.
Yeah.
All the welding and stuff was done with Endu as well. So all these little pieces, that's all normal mapped and just painted in 3D. Did you have something you were gonna say?
Yeah. Basically, Art wants to know whether the Terra was also modeled by hand or some external software.
The what?
Excuse my crappy English, sir.
It's not crappy.
let me say it in my perfect German accent.
Oh boy.
Basically, he wants to know whether or not the terrain was modeled by. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop. He wants to know. He wants to know whether or not the environment in your scene was modeled in Unreal or somewhere else.
So all this terrain, and excuse how bad it looks without the trees, because I didn't bother detailing all the terrain where you wouldn't be able to see it. The terrain itself is a height map / terrain inside of Unreal. That's all it is. So it's something you can sculpt and paint. You can change it on the fly if I wanted to come in here and make these parts bigger or smaller. Like I can come in here and just paint it up or down as I desire. That's all it is. It's just a terrain height map. And I actually, if you're not aware, you can actually export these terrains from Unreal. And so I brought these out of Unreal and then kicked it out to Max as an OBJ, and then brought it in so I could align the bridge, because there was just no way to do it otherwise, because you're constantly, like, you can't measure something easily in Unreal. So I had to kick this out into Max, place the bridge at the proper height where I had already built up the overpass, because this kind of started off as a ramp. You can kind of see it in the background here, where it kind of looks bad, but it's covered by plants, so it really wasn't a big deal. If it, I didn't put as much detail there, but like you can see where I put way more up here. I used erosion and hand painted in a lot of stuff to try to make it look like it had been raining, and some of the sand, the topsoil had been worn away, and there's like, you can see the clay coming out of the bottom of it, stuff like that. So yeah, it's all done in Unreal for the terrain itself, including the painting. It's all painted with the Unreal tools. Meticulously painted by hand across the entire thing, just to get it to look like that. And it's not even the best I could have done. I just felt that the plants kind of covered up most of the imperfections, so I felt like it worked for what it was. Honestly, I can't imagine like real terrain looking too much different from this. If you took all the plants away, it would probably look very similar. So yeah, so back to the lights and stuff. Like, again, this is all done with Endo and Dedo. This is all done with Endo and Dedo. This is all done with Endo and Dedo. I did everything you see here in terms of hard surface texturing with Endo and Dedo. I even covered it with tutorials too. If you're not familiar, I wrote two tutorials on ArtStation. One of them is for Endo, which I'm going to link in chat right now, which covers all the techniques and tips that I use. And the same thing with Dedo as well, including, again, all of the same techniques and tips that I use to do the work that I do. I try to share all the knowledge I have, not just because I work for the company, but because I feel like there's no point to having knowledge if you're just going to hoard it to yourself. What's the point of knowing something if you can't share it with other people? So I hopefully anything that I've said here today is useful to you guys. I did see a comment. I think it's a Dark Arbiter. He actually noticed one of the little Easter eggs I put in here. I'm a huge Big O fan. It's an anime from the late 90s and early 2000s, which is this guy right here. Let me grab the camera for him, and then we can actually take a look at it. I am actually building a model of him right now. I'm going to build a scale in New York City eventually and stick him in it and have him bust out through the ground and, beat some stuff up. It's one of my favorite shows, and I actually have a scale model of him sitting on my desk right now too. I may show it off in the tools group when I put up the work that I've done. But yeah, I hand painted him, tossed him in there. That's pretty much what he looks like. He's just a giant humanoid looking robot with a giant laser beam projector thing out of the top of his head. So he was a lot of fun to do. Not so much to model. Hard surface faces are not easy, and I'm hating every minute of it, but he's starting to look really cool. So I can't wait to finish him up and throw him through with the Quixel tool set as well. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to try to do two versions of him. Do the stylized anime shading, and then do a realistic version of him where he's all like rusted up and beat up looking. So hopefully I can pull it off and, maybe make it look as cool as this scene does. So yeah, that pretty much covers most of everything here. I mean, if you guys have any other questions or anything else you want answered, I will gladly talk for another few more minutes. So by all means, if you if you want to talk, now's the time to do it. Otherwise, I'm going to head off and greet my wife and kids when they come home. But to wrap up, everything you see here, like I said, is something that you can do yourself. Don't judge anything that I've done like you would judge a Facebook post in the middle of the night when you're thinking, oh crap, man, my life sucks. I'm not as cool as these other people. I'm not cool. I sit here and work nonstop. That's all I do. I go to work and work a 9 to 5. I come home, work for Quixel, and then I make stuff on the side, and I try to show it off and help you guys do cool stuff too. I don't get out as much as I'd like to. I've been changing that recently, so like I try to balance my work life and my home life more, which I haven't been doing admittedly. But you know, like I said, anything I do here is something you can do, and if you just have the ambition to do it, then you'll do it. That's all it comes down to. Like this scene, it's less talent and more just pure determination. Like I said, I wanted to do this, and I did it. The only person I was like the most critique I was afraid of was me having to face myself at the end of the day saying I made all these models and I didn't do anything with them. That was my pure drive for this whole thing. I made this train and did nothing with it for the better part of 4 years. After I graduated from college, I did 90% of it and then just gave up. And I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm just going to leave it to the dustbin of my modeling project folder and do nothing with it. I'm sure most of you guys can like kind of sympathize. I'm sure there's at least half of you who have a bunch of unfinished models that you just kind of like, I don't know if I want to work on this anymore. And then you
yeah, surely.
Yeah, you just give up, and it just sits there, and like it could be the best thing you've ever done, but you never know if you don't finish it. So, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of things that I've got that I haven't finished yet, but I'm gonna try to keep the robot from falling into that because he's such a cool looking robot, and you know, I wanna actually model him so like all the components function, so like he can actually lift his shoulders up and have the cannons pop out and have the missiles pop out of his chest and giant piston arms and he smashes something, all that cool stuff. You know, laser beam eyes, and even pull the sound effects from the show. So when he goes walking through the city, you'll hear all that stomping sounds he would make. So it'd be pretty sweet, I think. But yeah. So yeah, I guess not too many comments from what I can see. So I guess we can wrap this up here. Again, like I said, I hope you guys found this useful. It's a lot of fun to do this. I've been meaning to do it for so long. I got the flu like 2 months ago, and I couldn't talk for the better part of a month. I sounded like somebody had torn my vocal cords out. Like when I get sick, I get hit bad, so I apologize for taking so long to do this. I had planned originally to do this originally, I've said it twice. I had planned to do this when I had finished the project and do it about 2 weeks after to get it all prepped up. That's one of the reasons why the 80 level breakdown, which, crap, I need to actually link that too. I don't think some of you guys have seen it yet. Here it is. I'll link that in chat too. So, no, you may not see the robot just yet. He is not in a shape that I would feel comfortable showing him yet. I'm a little self-conscious about that because I don't do humanoid faces too often. So he's a little derpy looking as he currently stands. When he looks less dumb and I'm ready to show him off, I will gladly start showing it because I will probably do a stream about how to do stylized texturing with him. If you're not familiar with Didiu's capabilities, it is entirely capable of making stylized looks. So I will gladly show off how to do stylized texturing with it and how to do the same realistic stuff that you're used to seeing as you've seen here. So I think going for, I'm not going to say cell shading because I'm not really a huge fan of that particular style in 3D, but more of a single texture approach where everything's kind of baked into the, like all the lighting's baked in, you know, like that League of Legends / Warcraft style, kind of like that. So try to do that, show off how you can do that with Didiu, and you know, hope for the best. Maybe people will like it, maybe they won't. Who knows? So, just want to say thanks, Jacob, for making the time out of the day to do this. I know it's late over there in Germany where you are, but you know.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Glad I was part of this.
Always a pleasure to hear your lovely voice. Thanks to you guys for showing out too. It's so good that you guys can spend the time to hang out with us. I mean, I do 2 jobs at Quixel. If you're not familiar, I also run the product management for Quixel Suite, so I'm usually testing versions of that you guys haven't seen yet. There's awesome stuff coming down the pike for that. I'm doing my best to make that the best thing you can play with and have fun with. I'm also the community manager for Quixel, so this is part of what I do and wish I could do more. I'll be trying to change that so we can get more of these streams going. We're going to be doing more newsletters and whatnot. If you came here from the newsletter that we sent out, we kind of made a mistake and sent the wrong one out, but that's okay because we fixed it, right? You're here, right? I think. So we'll make sure that doesn't happen again. Sorry about that. And we're going to be trying to do more live streams coming up. A lot of the artists in Quixel are really amazing. Like, if you guys think I'm even halfway decent, the guys that I work with blow me away completely. Artists like Billy and Victor, these guys are just machines. I'm going to try to get Victor on a stream soon. He's the guy who made Homebound, the VR game. If you haven't tried that out on Steam, it's already out, and it looks completely gorgeous. you gotta try it. It is so cool. I hope you don't get sick from like VR though. If you do and you don't want to get sick, then I wouldn't recommend it. But you know, maybe take some motion sickness pills and give it a shot, huh? I think you can do that. If I can do it, you can do it. And I get motion sick like crazy. So, with that being said, I'm gonna wrap it up. Hope to see you guys next time. Thank you so much for coming out, and have a great rest of your weekend.
Yep. See you soon. Have a good one.